There were so many open doors to attack him. I mean, I remember.
And actually, this is the big myth, and I sort of feel like a part of the reason I've agreed to do this is because I like just sort of challenging some of these myths that I think exist about left politics. We don't think it's going to work if Labour keeps on chasing the Tories to the right. We think that's got to stop.
I actually hate the term centrist, and I hate it when even more when people try and be centrist. But okay, cool. So brilliant. Do you want to say a bit about yourself, and then maybe we'll start talking?
Yeah, I think you summarised a bit of it when I first came on. You were saying that I was a history teacher. I podcasted a bit a year or so ago with a friend of mine who teaches politics, and we did some stuff that was kind of, history, politics, kind of education stuff, and we did some stuff that was more about kind of modern politics and like right now. And the reason we did that was because James and I had basically both gone on quite a similar political journey where we started out fairly sort of middle of the road, liberal, broadly left of centre, very left of centre, and had ended up essentially, as the Corbyn project was falling apart and collapsing in 2019, becoming much more convinced of the idea of like the need for transformative left politics. So like we basically joined it as it fell apart, and were then really kind of like a bit gutted and homeless because this thing that we'd suddenly kind of invested in at the very last minute had obviously failed spectacularly.
If you hear me typing, by the way, I apologise. It's me writing down stuff you're saying, so just remember everything.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. No, well, I can't even see you at the moment, so I can see myself, and that's fine. I'll just talk, and if you tell me to shut up, if you need to shut up.
Okay.
So that's it. So I went on this kind of, James and I both went on this sort of political journey, and because we both did that at the same time, we blogged about it a bit and talked about it a bit, and I was involved with different things. I was involved with sort of like some new left parties that sprang up in the aftermath of that. James has been very involved with the National Education Union and still is. So I think we've both been sort of trying to figure out
where to go,
navigate politics. And I still don't really know. I still don't know, and I still kind of, ping pong around a little bit. But I think by and large, the broad trajectory, which is completely the opposite of what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to get older and get more and more cynical and like less, like you're supposed to ditch your youthful idealism. For some reason, I've gone completely the other way and gone from being a sort of really, from even as a student, I was pretty much kind of pro Tony Blair and so on. And I just like now, as a 37-year-old, I'm much more left wing than I was when I was 20. So, I'm some sort of weird outlier.
Yeah, I mean, in a way that happened to me. I was raised. I used to, when I was a kid, listen to my dad a lot, because my dad is very clever when it comes to science and maths and stuff. But actually, ironically, once I did A-level politics, I realised his political views are really stupid, and they started to get sillier and sillier. I mean, more recently, I'll try and say this with a straight face. He told me that the only two men who could save Britain were Nigel Farage and Richard Tice.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
I love my dad very much, but I love my dad very much, but he has some very silly things.
Having sort of boomer parents with disappointing politics is probably not
unusual. Yeah.
An unusual kind of experience. I mean, mine's the other way, right? So I've got very, very left wing.
Yeah.
But someone who's got no sort of theoretical grounding at all. So like my whole view of the left as a younger person was quite dismissive because my mum's politics was kind of like very simplistic. So I was just like, well, I'm not interested in that. So in a funny way, I had to navigate through it much later by sort of, finding the kind of theory and the sort of the interest in the sort of left politics that came from that. So I think, there's a natural element where you do push away from whatever it is you're exposed to, I think, when you're young, to some extent.
I think so. I mean, I think I gradually realised I was liberal in the sense that I think I've always, wonder what my political views are, but I've always been very, very socially liberal because I've always kind of just been, I've always just never really understood why people want to interfere in people's lives when they're not harming anyone. I've never understood why people are prejudiced. Like, I mean, I understand it in the sense if you have to learn about that, you have to figure it. But I've always believed very much if like someone, kind of in that kind of John Stuart Mill principle, that if like someone's really not harming someone else, like you can't really apply force to them. So I always believed that, but then I was always aware that I had that kind of liberal politics, but then also social, but also economically, I was somewhere maybe in the centre. Maybe I'm a little left of centre in terms of I've always, been in favour of like, high spending on the NHS. I mean, I think one thing we've seen with the Tories currently is that whilst they dishonestly point out that, which is true, but it's misleading, that they do increase NHS funding each year as a percentage of GDP, it's gone down year on year. So, you can kind of see like, you can kind of see the massive shift from patient satisfaction in 2010 being the highest it's ever been to now being the lowest it's ever been. So I always knew you have those very liberal social values, and then probably economically somewhere in the centre, maybe a little left of centre. So that's where I am. So so coming on to the Corbyn thing, I think our main area of disagreement is I felt that if you're gonna, firstly, I don't think Corbyn ran on a platform that was credible. There was hugely.
That was the word you used, right?
Yeah, there was hugely.
Yeah.
So it was because it's any one of the things I think that were being of the big economic proposals in the Labour manifesto could be done, and at least has some public support, certainly amongst Labour voters. So, for example, you're going to renationalise utilities. I think that it seems believable you could do that. You want to nationalise broadband. It seems believable you can do that. But the problem, and also when I say credible, it doesn't necessarily have to mean like just doable. It has to resonate with voters where they go, oh, this seems realistic, and I believe that this guy can do this. Not just, so, for example, whereas there was a lot, and although the Labour manifesto, they did kind of cost it, a lot of the funding for this was coming from the base, from the 26%, the raising corporation tax from 18 to 26%, which was a big risk in the sense of if people who say, and I'm not sure where I sit on this, but I think where a lot of economists say, well, that will just hurt growth, then you would end up getting a lower tax take anyway. So there was a lot of like, okay, this will all be funded and it is all costed, assuming completely fair weather scenarios. So there was a little of that, but sorry.
Well, they've done it, right? I mean, corporation tax is a really good example where it's like the Tories have done that.
Yeah, but are they getting the same amount? Yeah.
And so for me, like a lot of this stuff, it's like I hear people say like, "Oh, this is incredible," or whatever. I mean, I sometimes say to people like, Corbyn and McDonnell or whatever, think how much money they plan to spend. The Tory government spent, obviously, in the first year of that new government, way more, exponentially more.
A lot of that was because of COVID, though.
And we were all because of COVID, right? But we were all told in 2019, any government does that, the economy will collapse. Now, or indeed the money that the Corbyn and McDonnell were going to spend on collapse the economy.
Yeah.
So it's just like, for me, there are these massive holes. That you've got this kind of like, sometimes I think of politics as if there's like a narrative that's, we all understand, like, these are the rules, these are the things you can do, these are the things you can't do. And then I'm just sort of feel like I'm looking at it like, well, there's a massive hole there.
Well, I think that I'd say, I think I'd say in response to that I don't think you can count emergencies as something like that. For example, if you'd have said in the 1930s, well, can we have state socialism? Most people would have gone, no, you're crazy. But then we kind of had it during the Second World War. We had one party where everything's divided, everyone has ration books. But that's because there's a massive war on. So everyone's prepared to do what it takes. It's kind of, obviously, it's not on the same scale. But with COVID, when every business knows, everybody knows, and it's happening globally. So if COVID had been some kind of British disease that only affects British people, that would have annihilated our economy. I mean, because it did hurt the economy. It was just everybody there's no country. Here's the country with no restrictions, with no COVID that we can go to do business instead of Britain. So you're not going to lose money when the whole world's doing something. Everybody's behind you. Obviously get some, not us, but most people are saying, okay, we've got to deal with this crisis. We need, I think there's a big difference between doing that and saying, we're just going to spend this money without all of that. And I also one with the credibility issue, and this isn't fair, but it is true that people always people come from the starting point of viewing the left as not economically credible, and that therefore means that actually conservatives can get away with higher spending and higher taxes sometimes than, because a lot of it's about confidence, than a left-wing government can, which isn't fair, but does go towards something I want to come on to later, which is the leader has to be believable. You have to think, okay, this is difficult for this guy. These people, despite all of that, can be trusted to do these big reforms. And I think that's that's what I mean when I say credible. It doesn't even necessarily mean fair. Is it fair that this isn't taken credible? It means because it's just about will you win an election? And so it's like, okay, in that case, if Labour already aren't going to be taking that credibly, then when you put a platform forward, we have to, it can't be like, okay, if everything goes well, if we get what we want from corporation tax, if all of this works, we can fund these massive changes. It needs to be, we are credible economic people. We are economically credible. We have a good platform, and we can overcome that prejudice to make us seem as credible as Conservatives do.
Yeah. So I mean, it's funny because it's like these are arguments that I obviously have thought in the past, and B kind of I'm engaging with a lot, right? So I'm kind of like, yeah, I know I get that argument. I think the for me the bottom line is kind of, it goes a bit deeper really than what you're saying. I get obviously the logic of what you're saying makes total sense to me, right? But then there's a deeper question, which is, well, what if you're right? What if the economy's fucked and it doesn't work anymore? Like, what if the model that you're describing that limits the action of Labour politicians, which I think is real, right? It sets limits on the kind of what Labour politicians feel they can propose or get away with proposing, and in a way those limits don't apply to Tories, but that's because Conservatives won't go that far in that direction.
Yeah.
So then, but what happens if the whole thing's fucked?
Well, I think, to be fair, I think that's a really good question.
So like the housing market is basically unaffordable to millions of people, and public services being worked steadily, sort of slowly, like slow puncture, destroyed, or just less and less good, and people's wages and so on aren't keeping up with inflation. So what if you're just and by the way, like the planet's warming and we're we're not doing enough to mitigate the effects of climate change. So what if you've got these crises that are just structurally massive, and the whole model of our political economy doesn't address those problems? So, like, if you game out your situation, that was why I said at one point in our chat, like, I've seen how this film ends, right? So if I game out if you're right, if your model of politics is right, what do we do? Because we never solve those problems. We just kind of like have this like slow puncture political process that gets worse and worse and worse.
This is that's kind of the really big question, because I do kind of agree with you. The economic model is kind of fucked, and we do need people to change it somewhat. But firstly, I think it's important from what to what, and second of all, I think because I kind of do agree with you that, like, in the late 1970s, that economic model had kind of died, and then in a way that was actually quite not good and led to a huge amount of problems. Margaret Thatcher brutally murdered it and replaced it with her own economic model.
Yeah,
right.
I've got a podcast on that. So
okay, oh great! I actually might listen to it. Genuinely, I had skimmed through the catalogue and I thought, some of these sound quite interesting. So I do think we need that again. Not Thatcherism, for God's sake, but we need that. Yeah. We do need that change. But firstly, that then means we need somebody with at least the strength, force of will, charisma of like Margaret Thatcher, and the credibility. So it's not just about. I think this is an important point, and it's going to tie into a lot. It's not just about, from a baseline, having credibility, but it's about being able to build credibility. And it's about being able to say, okay, we're going to change how the economy works. I think there should be more thought. I don't like the kind of dichotomy of it's like, Conservatives want to come in and change the economy this way. Liz Truss tried her nonsense and nearly collapsed the entire thing. thing around her in 4 weeks flat. Labour want to do this. I don't. I mean, look, my educational background was in science, and I kind of always wish people were a bit more scientific about it and said, okay, we need to reform the economy. Let's try kind of sector by sector. Maybe let's even give local authorities more power over economics, and then we can apply, if one of them's doing something good, we can apply it over the country. I'd rather we had a much more, because I don't think anyone has a clear solution to the current crisis. And I think experimentation and just trying things locally, regionally, nationally, I think that's probably the way out. But if we're going to do something like that, whatever it is we're doing, that has to be led by somebody who can do that thing that politicians kind of stopped doing some time ago, which is actually trying to convince people. Because one of the reasons I think we probably agree that the state of the Labour Party at the moment isn't good, even as a Liberal, I want a good left-wing party, otherwise we're not having any proper discussion. I don't just want it to be kind of like centrist, half liberals, which they're not even liberal. So a lot of the policies are very illiberal. So I kind of want. I agree that like just going, which I'm rambling slightly. I think this started with Tony Blair, where we got this idea that okay, we have to focus group everything. We have to go, what do the people want? And I think he had a good point in terms of okay, not with that because I think it brought a lot of hollowness into politics, but with his idea of, okay, we need to start where the people are, which is what he called it. That's a good idea. So, okay, people don't agree. We need to move them forward. But I feel like even to be fair for all parties, what this has become is, okay, what do people believe largely what the right-wing press telling them? Okay, well, they believe that. I'm just going to say that, but I'm going to claim I can do it better than the other guy, which seems to be currently Keir Starmer's whole shtick, right? Is that like, well, we'll do Toryism, but we'll do it really sensibly and without the corruption. Right.
Yeah, it seems like that. I mean, I think it dates back to. I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm assuming you're not.
No, 37. Yeah.
Me. So, I think if you're sort of like in your mid-30s or whatever, or older or whatever, then there was a whole model of politics that you got used to, which I certainly I grew up with, which is basically a model of politics where everyone really kind of thinks the same thing, by and large.
I do. I think that's true, and I think that's led to a lot of the elections are won from the centre nonsense, which isn't really true. When things like 97 and times like that, and 2010, at least when maybe not 2010, but before that, when things are going quite well, yes, elections can be won from the centre. Number one, so you want a centrist candidate like Blair because things are going well. People don't want huge radical change. Because everything's good. So you want somebody who's I'm going to do gradual things, I'm going to eliminate child poverty, etc. And then you also get situations like in 2010, I think, the economy was tanking, the 2008 crisis had happened, but still the only way the Tories were getting elected again was by being really centrist and going, well, no, we're different Tories. We're not, the same socially conservative, homophobic, old, kind of Tory. Now we're new Tories. So, Cameron said he saw himself as the heir to Blair, which I think he was in all the worst ways. But
so the worst aspects of there is
none of the eliminating child poverty, investment in the NHS, investment in public services, but all of the hollowness, the shallowness, the everything's glib, everything,
Yeah, I mean, I would totally agree with you about that.
Yeah. So I think we'll probably agree. It's not, you can't just say, well, elections are won from the centre, but then I think we also have to focus on, okay, what is the message? How are we making it? And who is making the message? And one of the issues, and I think this is what I said to him when we were discussing it, was that like Corbyn lost twice. And like, we need to go, okay. And the second time badly, because the first time he was fighting Theresa May, who nobody liked, and her first action in the election was to alienate the Conservatives' base by going, right, we're attacking pensions and having to climb down because she was like, okay, well, now none of our base are going to vote for us.
I've got things to say about this. Carry on. I'll keep my mouth dry.
So then, you have Corbyn, he's lost 2 elections. And I think a lot of that was for several reasons. I think, there was the credibility of him as a whole. Because especially in 2017, his policies weren't that radical. But it was like much more so in 2019. Although, as I've said, I think that's more to do with like an accumulation of several quite big policies that made the overall picture a little too radical. But Corbyn, firstly, lacks charisma completely. And like, I realise if you like him, that probably annoys you. Like, no, it doesn't. But when you see him speak, especially in tough interviews when there's a back and forth, he kind of just starts jokingly speaking, and I don't think he gets things well. So I was watching earlier today. Bernie Sanders has been doing a book tour in the UK, and I mean, I followed Bernie Sanders for a while. I liked him, but you watch, because they were often compared, because you had this unusually left wing leader in the Democrat politics, and now the unusually left wing leader in the Labour politics, but Bernie Sanders is a very charismatic, extremely likable man. I kind of feel like whether you agree with Bernie or not, if you don't like him, like if you sit and see him speak and go, he doesn't come across as likable, you're probably slightly heartless. Like, you know, and I think if you especially want to do a radical agenda, having someone like that, who I remember, I can't remember if it was 2016 or 2020, I saw him go on a Fox News show full of all the big Fox audience. You know, by the end they're applauding him, and I can't imagine Corbyn doing that. Could you imagine Corbyn going on Talk TV and by the end of it, the whole audience are applauding him?
No.
Yeah.
No, no, that's true. I mean, look, Bernie Sanders is a really good politician. I mean, you know, the United States is a much bigger democracy,
yeah,
and it's not surprising that the people right at the top of it, or at least sort of in the left, there are these really much more charismatic figures than in Britain. I think, you know, there's several things. So I'll go back, right. So it's important to say that a lot of what I'm going to say now is my retrospective view of what happened. So at the time, I was pretty hostile to Corbyn, sort of right through, as I've already said. So I'm talking really like retrospectively, but and you can feel free to ask me questions about that. But,
sure.
So if we go back to 2015, when Corbyn is chosen as Labour leader, it's important to remember that. So, like, I think if you ask most left-wing people, it wouldn't be like, this guy is the guy, right? Corbyn goes up because basically the left feel like they've got to put somebody up. John McDonnell's already run, Brian Abbott's already run. You know, it's Corbyn's turn. They all know he's going to lose. They think, screw it, you know, we'll have a candidate on. You know,
yeah, I think they wanted to expand. It was a good idea. They said, look, let's expand the conversation. It can't always be the centre. Yeah.
Yeah. Famously, then of course you have various sort of figures, some of whom were quite right within the Labour Party, who let him get on the ballot. Probably regret this afterwards at all. And I think the thing that's just really important to remember is that in that campaign, Corbyn is really good. Like, you don't have to like all his politics. You don't have to think he's a great speaker. I agree with you. He's not a great interviewee. I think he's quite a good platform, like, stump speaker. I don't think he's particularly good at the sort of like modern, like, touchy-feely kind of stuff that politicians have to be able to do. But if you put him on a stump in front of an audience of a passionate crowd, this guy spoke at Glastonbury. I mean, like, I'm not saying, you know, he's got something. Right?
Sure, I think he can do. Sorry.
No, sorry. Just on that point, you know, you put him against Yvette Cooper and actually Andy Burnham and Liz Kendall in 2015. I think he destroys them. And let's be clear, right? He destroys them because a certain kind of political project has died, right? That actually, you've got these three figures who actually come from quite different backgrounds on the left. But everyone has agreed, and I remember this very distinctly. I was really following politics carefully at the time. The agreement of everybody was Labour was still too left-wing, even under Ed Miliband. It needed to go even further to the kind of centre ground or whatever. And a lot of Labour members just went, well, hang on, fuck it. Like, if we keep doing this, there's nothing left. Like, we weren't even that keen on Ed Miliband. You know, we went along with it because, you know, it was the best we had. But we weren't wild about it. The guy got 30% in the election, which is crap.
Yeah.
Right? And only 1% on People's Ground poll, 29%. Fuck it. You know, if people are going to keep telling us you can't have X, you can't have Y, well, why not? And this guy's just better than everybody else on the panel. He's saying stuff we actually think is true. And it's that point you mentioned before about if you're constantly appearing in public under these constraints, right? So politicians like Andy Burnham, who's actually quite left-wing, in that campaign was under this constraint of I've got to be grown up, I've got to be. Actually, people don't like it. People, and by the way, I think this includes a lot of the electorate. And it's a big problem. It's a big problem for Keir Starmer, which you can come back to if you want. Big problem for Keir Starmer is the electorate don't warm to him. The reason they don't warm to him is because they kind of know that he's talking under constraint. Right, he doesn't kind of actually believe a lot of the things he's saying. I think you had a thing on earlier, just as I was coming into your stream, where someone was calling in saying, like, I hope he's lying, right?
Yeah.
And it's so weird if you actually think about that for a minute. Like
Oh yeah, no. I saw an article about, I think it might have been in the Times or maybe it was the Guardian, where they were literally like giving examples of times. Well, sometimes leaders do feel constrained, and sometimes they can take. And it was like it was just I've got the vibe of that. There was that they were saying in a huge article exactly what that guy was saying, just over and over again. Look, he will be left wing when he gets in.
Yeah, it might be. I think
He might be.
It remains to be seen. I think I was sort of the view initially with Starmer that he would kind of be he would seek to do what I consider to be a sort of Joe Biden approach, which is basically to kind of try and knit together the kind of further left element of his party with a more mainstream party. And the reason I was so disappointed and shaded with him is not because, and this is really important to say, a real myth, I think. I'll finish on this really.
Yeah, of course.
I think it really is a myth about people on the left that they're just kind of complete morons, basically. They're just like idiots. And they only want a type of politics where they get everything they want. And actually, so the point I would make on this is just a really simple, which is that prior to 2015, people on the left get used to voting for stuff that they hate. They do it constantly, right? They vote for Miliband, they vote for Gordon Brown, they vote for Tony Blair. They don't like these people, but they figure, well, it's the best we've got, right? There's no real possibility there. So people on the left have done this for ages, right? And by 2015, they're just kind of fed up with it. And so suddenly you've got this guy saying, well, no, we're going to do what we actually think is true. And as for all the problems of that, right? And we can go in, I can say more about the 2017 election. I think it's a little bit too easy to sort of say, well, it was Brexit and that just meant that people voted Labour again. That wasn't what people were saying in the election. And by the way, not even after that disastrous policy release, people were still expecting May to absolutely mull Corbyn. And I remember this, right? I was following this election really carefully, not from the perspective of someone who particularly pro-Corbyn, but I was following it carefully. The expectation was the Tories would still win a majority right up to the wire. And the reason for that is because people still were saying, look, people will not vote for a Labour Party that is Ed Miliband polled 30%. That was too left-wing. You can't go any further left than that. And 2017 is really important because it shows that people will vote for something that's more left-wing. I agree with you. It wasn't massively radical. It's sort of basically European social democracy. I think it was a good manifesto. We can get into a whole, have a whole thing about like, 2019 was too radical, whatever. But again, what 2017 does, yes, they don't win, they lose. Bad result in that respect. But what it does is to pop a hole in this idea that people won't vote. People will, a Labour Party which offers a left-wing platform will just crash and burn. And because it didn't, and actually, kind of pundits after that election were saying, Corbyn's done much better than expected. There was really no expectation that he would step down as leader at that point. Obviously, in retrospect, from a left perspective, I'd probably say, yeah, it might have been good if he had. But that wasn't kind of feasible at the time. It's easy to look at that later and say he should have done. And so, I think Corbyn does something really important. And I will always say this, he takes a position, he takes a situation where basically our politics have become so consensus driven. Everybody was basically fighting over the same patch of turf. And he basically forced that conversation open. And, I don't know what the effect of that will be.
I think sorry.
Go on.
Yeah.
So I'll pause there.
Yeah. So I think that there is an element of that. I do think that there was in 2017. Although I think Brexit was certainly a factor with all the people going to the Conservatives, and I do know some people were voting Labour. Well, or at least maybe that's too anecdotal because I'm just going from what I was told on this canvassing. But a lot of people did view Labour as the main party. But also, yeah, I think people, especially young people, hadn't heard those kind of leftist things being expressed by a mainstream politician. And I definitely think that you're right, there is a big element of that. And that there was, at least in 2017, a big drive, especially amongst younger people, but not just younger people. Like a lot of people say, well, hold on. This guy is saying, is saying things that we haven't heard. And the reason I say especially younger people is I think a lot of a lot of people, especially like older people, thought of socialism as kind of something bad that destroyed the economy that we'd come out of. But then younger people didn't really have that, hadn't really been coloured by like issues in the 1970s and stuff. Which was actually a much more complicated reason than just simply leftist policies. There was a lot of it was more just so we don't need to go into the 1970s. Anyway,
you're saying that they had experienced the 2010s. So
yeah.
For them, they what model doesn't work? Well, this model doesn't work. Their parents saying to them, "Oh well, you can't vote for this because look at this economic disaster." These people are going like, "I can't buy a house.
Yeah,
I can't get a secure job."
And I think once that kind of stuff's happened, that I do think that there is an element that somebody comes out and says, "This is wrong. I'm going to do something about it." That there definitely is an impact of that, and I think especially with younger people, I think that's definitely true, and I think that netted him a lot of support. But I feel like that wasn't a slightly more moderate manifesto, but also, and I think this is important. Once I think when the right-wing press weren't taking Corbyn seriously and hadn't started launching the campaign of attacks on him because they assumed he would definitely lose. I think that he was able to come a close second, but firstly you need to kind of still get over the line and get the people to get you in, and also once the right start taking the left-wing leader seriously, and this is going to happen 100% of the time, and I'm sure we might wish it was otherwise, but like that is just fantasy. The right-wing press are going to come down on them like a ton of bricks, and whoever that is has to be able to weather that storm and overcome it. And I for a variety of reasons, I feel this wasn't Corbyn. And I feel like there were too many areas that were just like open doors for the right to attack him. And in a way, I suppose it's not his fault. He never thought he was going to be a party leader. So he could do things like meet with the IRA, refuse to he could do things like lay a wreath at grave, which there is some ambiguity of that. There is some ambiguity
on that, but I'm not.
Yeah, with the laying the wreath at the grave of he didn't actually lay the wreath. He was there, but they were late, which was just to commemorate people from a bombing.
It was a memorial event for victims of a terrorist attack.
It's
not even, there's lots of other like non.
But it was, but like the thing, I mean. But then, I was reading up on that today, but it is kind of complicated because I saw something saying no, all he was just the memorial for the bombings, and other people saying no, there is a memorial there for the terrorists who did that. But I don't really. You are, but to be fair, to be moderately fair to him, he was just there and started milling around. So I think
He's going to a memorial for some victims of a terrorist attack, and there are other graves in the cemetery, which are of other people who are more controversial. But there's no ceremony for them. It's just one of these like bizarre.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find whether there was or wasn't a ceremony for them because he definitely was at the thing for the bombings, but then there was other sites. So there was some article saying he was there, and to be honest, I don't know to trust on that. So there was also a wreath laying at the. But anyway, there's just there were too many avenues for them to attack him. Like he had called Hamas and Hezbollah friends. He had said all of these things, and he had always been this very anti-NATO guy which I think we'll probably come on to later, with like quite a bad foreign policy. Well, not bad foreign policy, I suppose, from my perspective, but I would say like, which had always been very, 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 very left wing when it came to when it came to foreign policy, which I think like especially on those issues is like there were so many open doors to attack him. I mean, I remember somebody calling in. I don't know if you ever listened to James O'Brien on LBC. There was a caller the day after who was like a guy from Birmingham who said, look, I've been in a union my whole life. I hate the Tories. I can't stand them. I felt I had to vote for them because I remember, the bombings with the IRA and what happened in Birmingham, and there was never justice. And I just felt him meeting them. And, I feel like it would be good. And again, I'm not even really blaming Corbyn for this because he just thought he was the kind of lefty weirdo at the back of the Labour Party. He never thought he was going to be in charge. But that left a lot of avenues for like the right-wing press to attack him and to like really hammer him, which he also had a tendency to not then retaliate back. So like, for example, with the IRA stuff, they said to me, okay, but will you condemn the IRA? And he was like, I condemn all bombing. No, but will you specifically say the IRA? No, I condemn all bombings or everywhere. No, but specifically when the IRA blew people in England up, will you just say that and he wouldn't. Yeah, and that's also a thing. It's like, it really doesn't take a lot to go, well, of course, I mean, I condemn all bombings, and therefore, obviously, I'm completely against this. I'm so sorry for the people. But he wouldn't do it. He went, no, I condemn all bombing. So I think when you've got somebody like... which makes him seem not credible.
Yeah, but so it just goes back to the point I made before, which is that, again, like, I didn't pick... Well, okay, if I had been on the left in 2015, I think it would still be true. I didn't personally pick Corbyn. Like, he, and actually, this is the big myth, and I sort of feel like a part of the reason I'm agreed to do this is because I like just sort of challenging some of these myths that I think exist about left politics. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's this cult of Corbyn," whatever. Every person I speak to on the left, right, and there are people who I think are slightly sort of mad and just become personal Corbyn obsessives. But the vast majority of people I know on the left have a very, very pragmatic view of it. They're just like, I don't give a shit who the guy is. I don't give a shit which leader. I need, this kind of politics is what I'm here for. So if it's Corbyn or McDonnell or Lewis or, one of the new generation of sort of more socialist Labour MPs, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? The whole point of being on the left is you're not supposed to have these kind of like obsessions of individuals. So yeah, I'm quite happy to say like, I don't think Corbyn's a sort of like flawless politician. I've always said that. I think he's deeply flawed as a strategist primarily. He was very, very naive in lots and lots of ways. And yeah, I think in the past he's made some connections and associations that I think don't stand up that well. The slight pushback I always make, of course, is to say, I don't know, if we want to talk about bad foreign policy, I can talk a lot about the destructive impact of the foreign policy of Tony Blair or David Cameron.
Sure.
And this involves like real people dying, right? So there is always this thing of like, well, it's interesting to notice what people get upset about. They don't get upset. But let's bury that because you're making the point that this is about how the media frame it, which is fair enough. Right? So I agree.
Because I don't just want to go, well, look, personally, I don't agree with it. We could have that discussion, but I thought like, that's not a good. That's less interesting. Rather than go, oh well, I'd favour a more liberal policy, and you go, well, no, because like I feel like debate, because if Corbyn's good for the left, it kind of doesn't matter if I agree or disagree with his foreign policy.
Yeah, like I would prefer right now that we could forget the guy. That would be my preference. Right? He's clearly the past. I've got no expectation that this guy is ever going to be an important figure on the left ever again. Right? Now, what's the only reason why I still sort of find myself talking about him is because I think that there's something happening which is dishonest in terms of his deselection from Islington North. And the reason I think that is, again, not because I think he's flawless. I don't think his response to the EHRC report was particularly well judged. We could get into a line by line. I can tell you why I think that actually what he says isn't as sort of like as toxic as people say it is. But of course, it's still badly judged politically. It's still like.
I think it's less toxic. I think it's more.
And it's poorly timed, right? I would agree. But I still think there's a deeper dishonesty happening at this point, which is, first of all, it's the idea that you don't just have to kind of move on from the left and drop some of their policies. You have to like constantly stab these guys in the face in front of the public in order to be seen as credible. And I think this is wrong. I think it's deluded. I think actually the public have kind of
moved on.
Already kind of forgotten about Jeremy Corbyn. The only reason people still talk about Jeremy Corbyn is because the Labour leadership keep talking about the guy and have done so incessantly for 2.5 years. Very bizarre, right? People, I think, people weren't still talking about Ed Miliband in 2018, right? As leader, it's gone. Like someone's been leader for 3 years. So there's this kind of bizarre thing that it's sort of like we have to keep on showing the public how much we've moved on. If you look at word clouds about the Labour Party, nobody's talking about Corbyn. No one cares. So, so for me, it's the Labour right who won't let it die. And they feel as if they have to keep doing this. And I think the reason they feel like that is because, not because anything particular about Corbyn, it's because they want to say to the public, no, not even that. They want to create the discourse in 15 or 20 years' time that says, oh, Starmer had to destroy the left in order to win. And he had to do all this stuff. And that becomes part of our national conversation.
Sure, I don't know if I don't know go that far to say that it's to control the narrative in a few years. I think they're terrified of those kind of attacks from the right wing press, and I think that they want to go, look, his career's dead. Now we've dug his career up again. We've burned it at the stake. Yeah. It's kind of like when I think in like 1750 they dug Cromwell up and like hung his skeleton. You know?
Yeah. 1650. Yeah. Did do that.
Oh, was it in the 1650s? So not long. Well, no, wait, he was alive in the 1650s.
Yeah.
No, I mean, they dug his skeleton up after he was dead, like a few, wasn't it? Like, yeah.
They put it on trial. Yeah, they tried it. They tried his court.
Yeah, which is kind of.
That's happening.
I do feel like that's happening in his career. I feel like it's them kind of almost like prostrating themselves and saying, because this is an area where I think perhaps we do agree, which is that they go way too far the other way. That rather than go, well, you know what? Jeremy had this very, very radical platform. Also, him as an individual, there was failing of anti-Semitism, there was all of this. But we are going to take which kind of what Keir Starmer said at the beginning was actually quite good, which is that, like, yeah, we're going to learn what was good from that, and we're going to bring it over. But right, that would have been good. So, a lot of my criticisms of Corbyn, none of them are excusing Starmer, and I think he's like kind of very rightward shift and failure to say, okay, well, look, a lot of people did want some left-wing policies, so maybe what are those? Maybe like it's actually a good idea to, and so yeah, I think that is disappointing, and I think that's why they are doing that, and I think that's why some people do say, like the guy in the clip I played, or I hope maybe he's lying, because I think a lot of people can see that they're doing that and think, well, maybe they are lying. Maybe really we will get a somewhat left-wing government. I mean, I wouldn't vote for something. I'm never going to vote for somebody on faith, but
No. Yeah, I mean, people know Starmer's lying, right? Because he's telling. I mean, Starmer, he's done pledges. Everyone's made a big point of this, that he's done these 10 pledges to win the Labour leadership, and then he's more or less dunked them. And actually, you'll get a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, that's really good strategy," and you have to do that. You have to kind of campaign in a leadership election. And the thing I just always have to sort of say to people is, like, you realise that people aren't paying attention to this, right?
Yeah.
Like people. I feel like we have this weird political culture where we talk about political strategy in this way as if people aren't listening.
Yeah.
Like ordinary people are like just sort of like treated as like fucking idiots. Like they just are like, yeah, these people lied to you. Like, that was pretty smart. Like he really played you there. Like, did you notice that? How he said he was going to.
It's amazing how many people though, like, how many people don't mind that. I remember I was arguing with we were having a chat with a guy who was conservative, a member of the Tories, once outside a bar, and I remember he goes to me, I was like, I just wish the politicians, that they'd be more honest and like say what they mean and really do things like, that's how the game's played. Come on, it's all part of the game. Yeah. And like, he's not the first person that said that to me, and I get why politicians rationalise it like that in their head, but then I kind of get confused why an ordinary person would go, yeah, you know what, they're lying to us and tricking us, but that's all the game.
I'm going to tell you why. Because nobody likes to feel they're stupid.
Yeah.
That's why. So what you do, you create a kind of politics where everybody's cynical. Because everybody's like, well, they're all lying. And nobody wants to be tricked. Because the worst thing you can be, right, in the world is a mark. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, full, yeah. The victim of a con.
You get played. That's the worst thing. Nobody wants to be a mark. So everybody kind of talks about politics now in this deeply cynical way. And what that means is people don't really have much hope of anything changing. And I think that this kind of political discourse really aids that. And it makes it really difficult to build political solutions. I think that's true. And I agree with you that until you've got somebody really charismatic who can sort of take that on a little bit and say, well, hang on a second, we need to do this, this, and this, and we need to build a movement that can achieve those things, then I think politics is kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So, I don't think Corbyn was that guy. But yeah, I also don't think Starmer's that guy either. So I sort of feel like, to be honest, I'm just more in despair. I felt like I was, and this is important. I think a lot of people on the left, I really do think this. A lot of people on the left would have just gone along with a version of Starmerism that was just offered a little bit more, and wasn't so overtly hostile to the left, and was a kind of a version of what he had initially campaigned on. But he wasn't brave enough to do it. And now, of course, the guy's absolutely, he's way ahead in the polls. Now, my view on that has got a lot to do with the fact the Conservative Party's totally imploded. But, he's got no incentive to change. I don't think he will particularly change. I don't know how, I think it's really, I think that the guy who was saying, I hope he's lying, I feel like the difficulty with that people aren't realising is that there isn't going to be a lot of room for Starmer to move to the government. Like, the press are not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
If we're talking about
the thing is, like, if you look at somebody like Blair doing that, he actually, because he still ran on that manifesto, and his whole, like, because people often, I think possibly because the Iraq War, that then everyone kind of views him as almost like a right-wing leader, that at least in 1997, Blair was running on was running on it was quite a radical platform, not like radical like Corbyn's, but it was like, okay, the old stuffy old conservatism's out, and we've got a new kind of Labour. We've got a new Labour where, okay, we're not like socialist necessarily anymore, but we're going to do the big spending. We're going to have all of these projects, but then we're also pro-business, and it's this whole new, and a lot of it was got a complete sham, like the Cool Britannia and all of this, but it was done to try, but there was a clear message of this is changed. We're getting something different, something completely new.
Stuff, right? The minimum wage, Sure Start. These are really.
Blair did a lot of stuff. Child poverty, like massive reductions in child poverty. They're really, really great spending on the NHS. They like EMA, there was loads. Blair actually did a lot of good stuff. He just invaded Iraq and destabilized the Middle East and killed about 1 million people. So
how much is left?
Hardly any. The Tories got rid of most of it. Yeah. Almost all of it.
So what's the danger then? If you don't have a platform that's radical enough, then it doesn't really structurally change anything.
Yeah.
If you just move stuff around within the economy, someone else just comes in and moves it back. So
I think that's always going to happen in a democracy, because you could say that as a conservative, you should go, oh, well, if we don't do the crazy radical Liz Truss, overhaul the whole economy, then, someone could just come in and do some left-wing changes,
I know what you mean, but we're in Thatcher's economy, right?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. So in other words, Blair doesn't change that. Now, I think to some extent he can't. I think I agree with you to the extent that there isn't a consensus for that. Like you said before, people are relatively prosperous in that period, 90s, 2000s. There isn't a consensus to massively shift that political model. That's the thing I'm really talking about, is the idea that I think that's what's changed. If I was to put my politics in a nutshell, it would be, you're probably right, Blair probably can't change those things in the 2000s. Now you could change them, because the consensus around that political model is gone.
Yeah, I think a lot of the issue now, though, is that there's not a clear model of, okay, what can we actually change to? So for example, in the 1970s, I can't remember which journalist it was I saw saying this. He was like, yeah, we had to throw out all the Keynesian stuff. And we immediately were like, okay, this is what now all the Tories are believing. We have to now read Milton Friedman, and we have to now have all of these, but these the free market libertarian books. But what is the actual, not that I'm saying, oh, which is the book we should read, but what is the policy platform, the clear underpinning economic ideology that we can change to? Because even what Corbyn was doing just seemed to be more nationalisation, higher spending. So I mean, where I don't think anyone knows what or has a proposal for that looks credible for the complete root and branch change of how the economy works.
Well, that's what radical means, of course.
Yeah.
I think.
Literally to the roots. Yeah. Roots. Yeah.
So the idea of you plant new roots, or you get to the root of a situation.
Yeah.
And change. Yeah, I think. What kind of economy are we talking about? Well, we're fundamentally talking about one where the kind of priority, the organising principle of the economy is not to enable a small number of people to get very, very rich. That's basically that's not the organising principle of the economy, which I think it has been for the past however many years. We shouldn't have. I don't think we should have an economy in which you can make tons of money out of housing. I just don't think that should be our model. It should be an economy where the focus is on ensuring that everybody can live with dignity. Basically.
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I agree. I think it's a massive kind of shift from where we are now, but it's going to need leadership, and I think it's going to need leadership that's great. It's going to need leadership where people are they don't just, when the right wing press come for them, they actually say, you know what, I know who owns you, and I get what this is about, but I'm not. I think that kind of thing. I think you could do something that was really populist and by the way, I don't think we should treat populist all the time as some kind of dirty word. You could do something that was populist in the best sense, i.e., it really motivated ordinary people by presenting them with the possibility that their lives could be improved by changing the way things worked. So like, again, would this be easy? No, I don't think it would. Do I expect Keir Starmer to do all of this? No. And that's not my, I don't think that's feasible. I don't think the guy's got the charisma to do that, probably. But it's disappointed me that I don't think he's tried. But I think he's essentially just allowed much of the kind of rhetorical gains of the Corbyn period, i.e., like shifting aspects of the conversation. I think he's more or less just conceded that ground back.
I agree. I think what was needed was to go to my earlier example, kind of like a left-wing Thatcher in a way. At least from a left-wing perspective, was that somebody who has absolute steel determination and self-belief, has these like policies, wants to get them through. He's very charismatic. He's very good at getting them through. He's very good at appearing credible. Yeah. So one of the things about Margaret Thatcher that, like, you can see there are some interviews, they're on YouTube, you can see them with Sir Robin Day that she did for the election in 83 and then in 87. And like, it is kind of amazing to see like a politician just answer all the questions and like really believe what they're saying. And again, don't get me wrong, I condemn Thatcher's policies completely. But like, I think, first of all, I just wish politics was like that again. Right? Like, people say, here's what I believe, here's what I mean, and I'm going to defend it, and I'm going to try and convince you. But I think the left, probably liberals too, like need someone like that. I mean, for the as a member of the Lib Dems, where that party is going at the moment is
definitely needed.
Yeah,
you guys need it more than anyone.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've met Ed Davey, and he's a lovely guy. But I think that's the most interesting thing you can say about him. Yeah, he's a nice guy. Just because they keep bemoaning, why don't we get on the telly? And I'm like, well, because we're not saying or doing anything interesting or put anyone interesting forward. So
no, I mean, and the Liberal, the Liberal Democrats just suffer from that. Obviously, the squeeze in 2015.
Yeah,
you've just got less MPs to choose from. You've kind of like gone through a few leaders or whatever in recent years.
Yeah. Well, that was it. There was the big squeeze, and then. And that's that was just it. You kind of were left with Ed Davey, who'd been in government, especially after.
All right.
Yeah.
I was up there in Chesham and Amersham at the by-election. The Dems absolutely smashed that. Yeah,
the Lib Dems. People don't realise the Lib Dems, from campaigning with them, have a huge amount of grassroots support. Like they have a huge amount of people that they can get out on the street.
Places, I think.
Yeah, because
I live in East Sussex, so I'm actually in Seaford.
Yeah,
near Lewis. So Lewis is like Lib Dem heartland. Like, if they don't take that back at the next election,
they're in trouble.
Really wrong now. They absolutely should get it.
But
there's definitely hope there. But I think you're right. But the deeper point where you're right is you go back to the 80s, and it's not only Thatcher. If I was to say on the right, you could also pick up people like Edward Tyne, but you could also look at, actually you could look at liberals. You could look at, guys like Jeremy Thorpe. Obviously, he's quite controversial, but like, an effective political communicator. David Owen, Roy Jenkins, Barbara Williams, Shirley Williams, not Barbara Williams. That's Dennis Healey in the Labour Party, Tony Benn in the Labour Party. In other words, you have people who are real heft. You watch these guys, you think, these guys can talk about politics. They've got ideas.
I think that's some of the issue with people like Tony Benn. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's some of the issue with them is they came off as way too ideological and way too left wing. Even though Tony Benn's another one where, like, you hear him speaking, like, okay, he's a very likable guy, very charismatic guy. It's kind of amazing sometimes when you look at Hillary Benn and think that was his son. Yeah, okay, they really couldn't be more. That's an example of the kids swinging to the right from their parents again. Yeah, yeah,
I think he would just see it as more pragmatic, right?
yeah, I think so. Yeah, but yeah, no, but I do think that Tony Benn fell foul of being very, very left wing, and then that just was never seen as that as hugely credible, which maybe unfairly. Maybe we could have actually, you know what, if Ben had won the struggles in the Labour Party and they'd have managed to get themselves elected, I don't think they would have with Ben in charge. Like, especially given how much they struggled in the 80s, I don't think. But, like, still, yeah, maybe things would have worked, but that is a credibility problem the left have. That, like, when you go really far left, you sound too ideological. And also, I think the supporters around you have a tendency to become too ideological. Whereas when Tories become right wing, they'll vote for anyone who they think is going to get the policies through. You saw it in America with the evangelical Christians voting for Donald Trump. You see it with, we see it here with like people spotted Johnson for so long. People say, Tories will, like, conservatives will go, okay, this guy's going to get what I want through. I'll support them. Whereas I think when leftists become very left, they tend to become very, like, almost like puritanical, and then it makes them not seem credible. It makes them say, like, okay, I can never change this guy's mind.
It's like I say, I think what that misses is the idea that the left compromise all the time.
They do. So do the right, to be fair, but yeah.
Right, for the left. So, like, if you take the 2017 manifesto as a good example, it's not a really left-wing manifesto. It just isn't. It's not. If you to ask left-wing people, do you want all these things? Or no, the left-wing people would have gone on, particularly on things like immigration, would have wanted Labour to go much, much further.
Yeah.
So in other words, the idea that people on the left won't make compromises is a myth. You constantly have. I can tell you from personal experience, you constantly have to compromise.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think in politics, definitely. I mean, I reread the 2019 manifesto before we did the debate, and I mean, you can see that, especially on foreign policy, there were some like big concessions. Like they got the promise to stay in NATO and do the, which obviously Corbyn must have had to concede on to say we support NATO, we're going to keep a nuclear deterrent. So yeah. I mean, I think that's being a left-wing politician, you're going to get forced into it because it's kind of like, okay, look, unless you're So I think it's a
forced into it, but what if Corbyn actually was like, okay, well, yeah, I'll compromise on that because I want to win. I actually think, again, it's sort of a myth that we're not stupid. Like, obviously we get it. Like, you've got to try and win. I think it's kind of myth. Like, oh, Jeremy Corbyn didn't even want to win. Like, he just I think he did. I think he did want to win.
I think he did, but then they
think he was like really, really good at sort of getting his message across in 2019. No, I think it was really flawed. But again, we always talk as if people in the centre have got it really figured out. And again, like, someone like Ed Miliband or whatever, Jeremy Corbyn poll in 2017.
Ed Miliband actually was more left. Like, he actually said that he really wanted to be like Margaret Thatcher, but left. So he wanted to do that thing I was saying, but he said he was too scared to. Ed Miliband, but he was too scared to. He was too scared to say it during the election, and you kind of wonder, well, wait, what if he had have just come out and gone, no, you know what? Right, maybe he would have got, but so that's true.
Go on.
But yeah, I think the thing with saying Corbyn not wanting to win, and I think a lot of the stuff with also that I was saying is when you're a politician, you're going to have to make those compromises. But I think we saw with Momentum and with a lot of his supporters that they were very uncompromising. That they didn't. A lot of them said, "Well, there's not as much care." Like a lot of them did say things like, they weren't as bothered about. No, they weren't bothered about winning, but they wouldn't change. I can't remember. I'd have to look over that polling data. And also, then there was a lot of online abuse from like Momentum people towards. Which towards like the more centrist or right-wing Labour people, which really didn't help, and then kind of made them go, okay, well, if you're saying we're terrible and we're traitors and we're ruining the Labour Party, I think that's why a lot of them are like, when they're kicking Corbyn and all these people out, because they kind of remember how they were treated by Momentum and by a lot of their supporters, who did get very puritanical when they were in charge.
Yeah, so all I'd say on that is, I'm just retreading things I say a lot, but I'll say, so the most broadly balanced Labour Party shadow cabinet of the past 15 years easily is Jeremy Corbyn's first cabinet, right? His first shadow cabinet.
Yeah.
Got Hillary Benn. It's got various other figures. I'm trying to think off the top of my head now. I can't really remember. Various other figures from the Labour right. It's got John McDonnell. It's got him. It's got Diane Abbott. it's an incredibly broad shadow cabinet. And of course, what happens over the next 4 years? You have this like mayhem about whether or not certain Labour MPs are going to get deselected. By the way, this includes Labour MPs like Neil Coyle, who was suspended recently from Parliament for racial abuse. It includes MPs like that strange one from Northern Ireland, Kate Hoey, who ended up campaigning for Brexit with Nigel Farage. You know, these were not like even recognisably left wing in any way, really. But how many Labour MPs get deselected between 2015 and 2019?
No, not many, but I think it's. I had heard I had heard from some of them, and the
zero.
Yeah, I think it was the threat. I think it was the threat though of deselection.
Deselected. So you have this kind of madness, something like there's Stalinism in the Labour Party. You know, there's kind of this iron grip of the left.
Well, I think that's an example of how like the loudest voices tend to get amplified. So when you're an MP and then people are coming to your meetings and shouting, you should be deselected, you need to go, you've got blah, 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 you're a red Tory. Like, even if that's only, 20 people out of your local party and like they've no chance of winning, like, well, everyone else is at home drinking tea, they don't even know you're doing a speech. So it can kind of seem like really vitriolic and vicious, and you think you're an MP, like that's your job, and people are coming over going, like, screaming at you. I think probably you're right, there probably wouldn't have been enough support to remove people, but I think
there would have been. I think you could have got. I think if people like Corbyn had been tougher, they could have pushed more people out. Definitely, they don't. Corbyn is a real, like, one of the most frustrating things from my perspective. Corbyn is a real Labourite. He's very reluctant to move against even pretty hostile Labour MPs.
Sure, but I mean, I'm talking about his supporters in Momentum. I'm talking about his supporters though in Momentum. I don't think Corbyn was personally doing that.
But I still think, I think they could have gone further than they did. I'm not going to sort of. There are aspects of the way in which Momentum is talked about which are they're sort of factually wrong things, right? There are famous examples, for example, of there was this thing about Angela Eagle has a brick thrown through a window. Now, if you go and look this up now, you'll find this is just complete myth. It didn't happen. So there are lots of there's lots of like mythologization about Momentum. Momentum is mostly just like quite young, idealistic left-wing people who are seeking to try and back this guy because he's energized them in politics. I'm not going to pretend that sort of every single person behaves, absolutely honorably or whatever. It's politics. I mean, politics is contested, right?
Sure.
People agree.
But I don't think it was just about. I don't think for a lot of those Labour MPs, it was just about, people deselecting and screaming and shouting. I think that what a lot of people came into the Labour Party, like huge numbers of, to vote for Jeremy, that I think a lot of them felt, that these were a lot of people who kind of joined the parliamentary party during the Blair years, who felt that those people have very different ideology to them. And I think that worried them a lot. And I think they felt, rightly or wrongly, I'm not even saying whether it's true or false, that their party was kind of being taken over by this very left-wing faction, where, admittedly, like a lot of those people who did join as the registered supporters, I can't remember what the term was, were like ex-communists, were entryists. And not that that's Corbyn's fault. He didn't tell them, hey, join up and vote. But if you imagine you're like a moderate Labour MP, you remember the party, you grew up watching, or maybe not grew up, but you liked Tony Blair, you liked the last Labour government, you joined up, you became an MP, and then kind of a load of ex-communists join and tell you to vote for the most left-wing guy in the party, who everyone kind of thought was a bit of a weirdo anyway. You could kind of see how that would be very intimidating. And that's not Corbyn's fault. That's not Corbyn's fault. I'm just saying you could see why they would then react like that.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying, what if they were wrong?
In what sense?
What if all those Labour MPs, very venerable, some of them 5, 10, 15 years of political career, whatever, and their sense is you can't have someone like Jeremy Corbyn, and you have to sort of go, and they have to be more aspirational. What if they were just wrong in their reading of the political situation, and that I'll just gently point out that Jeremy Corbyn wins in every single membership category in the Labour Party. He wins amongst members who've been in the party for 30 years. He wins amongst members for 5 years. He wins amongst, and he does that in both elections.
Yeah.
So he's not winning because of entryist. He's winning in every single category.
Oh no, no, I wasn't calling him an entryist. He'd been a member.
No, but I'm saying he's not dependent. In other words, if people are looking at it saying, you've got these entryist coming in, that's a misreading. Like Jeremy Corbyn is winning in every single tranche of the membership. And the reason that's happening is because members are looking at it going, we don't think it's going to work if Labour keeps on chasing the Tories to the right. We think that's got to stop. And I think they were right. I think their judgment of politics was better than professional MPs.
I agree to an extent with that statement, but I think stopping chasing them to the right should have been, again, like I laid out my criticisms of like the Blairism, but that kind of, okay, we're doing a change. If they'd have run on the kind of, well, we're doing this change, but like still keep the idea that on some levels maybe we're economically kind of in the centre, but also we're like, not, we're doing this right. Because I actually hate the term centrist, and I hate it when, even more when people try and be centrists. Because what are you in the centre? Between what and what? Because like 99.9% of people are, in the centre between Stalin and Hitler. So, well, firstly, what does it even mean? But second of all, when you try and be a centrist, you just become bland. So it happened to the Lib Dems. So no, we need to be the moderate centre ground party. Yeah. Which is silly because it's like, well, we're not moderates on Brexit and we're not moderates on liberalism. I believe in like doing huge criminal justice reforms, doing all sorts of stuff, ending the war on drugs, things like this. They'd be really quite radical. So those are radical. And like, by centrist, you just mean that economically we fall probably somewhere in between Labour and the Tories a little bit, but probably more towards Labour now. Because that's not really being centrist. That's just so that then when you try, oh no, we must be centrist, you go, oh, what you're actually saying is not really anything meaningful, just we must be bland. We've got to be, so yeah, I don't agree with centrism or think it's useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of issue. I think we kind of actually agree on quite a lot. I think it's just the kind of like, was Corbyn useful that we disagree on?
Yeah, I mean, the war on drugs thing, I mean, I think that's a great example of actually, so a really good example. You know how we often, this cliche about sensible politics, which drives me absolutely insane, right? I hear it. So, you've got to have a grown up, you've got to have someone sensible. So one example of where this really annoys me is an example of grown up sensible politics is doubling down on the war on drugs, right? That's the kind of thing that if you do that, the press will go, yes, that shows he's a sensible politician. He understands, in other words, you're just going to keep immiserating people for no good reason. Yeah,
it's also not sensible. I mean, yeah.
So why is that sensible? Well, because basically some newspaper editors have decided it is.
Well, I think that's a great example of.
Insane.
I think that's actually a great example of what I meant about like the need for a really charismatic leader with some determination, with skill. It's because to make those arguments, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, the war on drugs has been a catastrophic failure. It's destabilised half the world. It's kind of put people in prison for things you probably shouldn't be in prison for having. I think it's kind of crazy that you want to search someone, arrest them because they might have something that's not good for them on them. That seems a bit silly. That seems crazy. It's led to it's led to organised crime. Like it's basically the reason we have county line gangs, we have knife crime. Yeah, it's a catastrophe. But to fight that, you have to be really good. You have to be really charismatic, and you have to know how to demolish all the silly arguments that they're going to come up with. Like, well, what about this boy? And it's like, well, okay, we're trying to talking about the whole policy, not like, okay, drugs can do terrible things, but that's we you need to have this, like, you need to have someone who can sit with, argue with Daily Mail journalists, argue with this, and be on point to get that kind of change. And then I think as well. Right, and so it's firstly that, and then second of all, I think you've got to have the rest, like your policy platform. It goes back to the word credible, which is kind of like ineffable in a way, like in terms of like what's it actually mean, because it's like you need that platform to be convincing to people, so that when you go on Question Time, when you go on Newsnight, when you go on any of those shows, people come away from that thinking, "Wow," right? Not rather than thinking, "Oh, well, like." So you need to be able to do that, and you need to. Again, in that way that Margaret Thatcher did, to come on and say, no, we're changing the complete way we're doing everything. We're changing everything. And I just really don't think Corbyn, was that guy. And I think that too much of the love of Corbyn was very misplaced in him for doing that.
But John, let's be clear, right? Johnson wasn't credible either, right? I mean, ridiculous, laughably uncredible. Like,
Yeah, no, that's that. Unfortunately, too many people have been. Well, two things had happened. Firstly, too many people have just been ruined on the right into believing really stuff that no one should give any credence to ever.
yeah,
Like I mean, I debate politics a lot with my dad,
yeah,
and the stuff, the stuff that the people just believe and just accept as true.
mm,
It did seem that the Conservatives, especially on the right, got very, very tribal. And then I think then the reason Johnson got such a big majority was actually not just Brexit, because it wasn't. I think there were a lot of people voting for him who didn't even vote for Brexit, but were just sick of all the political nerds like me going on and on and on and on and on about it. And people that's why he went, oh, you know what, just get Brexit done, and then boom, like, okay, got a huge majority. And I think that's why actually the Conservatives are going to struggle with a lot of the red wall seats, because he got a lot of votes from people in areas where, like, I'm from Yorkshire, where people will say, well, I've been a socialist all my life, but he managed to get them to vote for him on Brexit, and I think a lot of that.
Do that.
Yeah,
got the same kind of appeal. But the point I was making really was just, by the way, so this was the reason actually that I shifted to the left, was because the Johnson thing totally blew it for me, because it was like, the whole time what I've been saying about the Corbynite left is you can't back these guys because what they're saying is incredible, right? Exactly what you've been saying. And then you get this guy Johnson, and I realised this guy was going to win, right? And I knew that he was lying. And I didn't just know that he was lying, I knew that the people who edited the major newspapers also knew he was lying.
So did most of the people who voted for him.
Oh, yeah, no, right, yeah, exactly.
But it's the Trump thing of it's seen as authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah, and Johnson does this thing actually, which also Trump does. Go back to that point we were talking about before about Trump and Johnson both have this thing of like, in a way, like I'm such a liar that you almost can't be tricked by me.
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting element of Johnson's appeal and Trump's appeal, which people need to get savvy to, is the idea that if you have this political culture where people are fed up with being lied to, they won't go to politicians who they think tell them the truth. They'll go to politicians who tell them that they're lying.
Who just lie in the most obscene way imaginable. That's just so obvious, because it's like, well, he's authentically a liar.
You're not a mark.
Yeah.
You're not being played. That's really important. So people were like, oh, I'll vote for Johnson because like he's not trying to trick me. He's a liar, and he's kind of opening. But to come back to my point, right? It seemed to me to just dismantle the whole logic of politics, the whole logic that said you have to have this kind of sensible, moderate program, because I thought, well, no, like you can just come on and talk shit and people will rally behind it. And I just thought, well, fuck it. I actually think we need to do this and this, so I'm just going to argue for that now, because I'm sort of done with, if Johnson can win an election, then that's it. I'm done with sensible politics.
Yeah, I agree to an extent, but I think that's something that people on the right get away with. I don't know if you could have a left wing guy who was lying. Like if Keir Starmer even had done like let alone, it's not even just Corbyn. If Keir Starmer had done one or two of the things Johnson had done, it'd be destroyed.
Destroyed. No, I agree. No, there's a great line actually from a left writer called Matt Cousin, who says, just a really simple line: the Tories play politics on easy mode. In other words, they've got like the settings of the game that are different to the Tories. They've got like the easy mode settings on, and that's true, isn't it?
It is true. I think a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to see what to do, because I think a lot of that just stems from the sort of person who's rich enough to buy a newspaper is probably going to be a Tory.
Oh yeah, and here's where I agree with you that you have to do politics.
Yeah,
you can't do politics. You can't do politics on the terrain that you would like. It's like, well, I don't want to have that kind of media, so let's pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You have to do politics in the terrain where it actually exists. But equally, my view would be, you've got, if you take that seriously, you say these guys are always going to drag down a Labour platform, basically. They're going to drag Starmer down, by the way, and they're going to run the Corbyn stuff anyway. They're going to do, in fact, what they're going to say is like, you deselected this guy, but you wanted him to be Prime Minister in 2019. You're obviously a liar. Like, why did you want an anti-Semite to be Prime Minister? So they're just going to use what Starmer said about Corbyn against him.
Yeah.
When the election, they're going to throw all kinds of shit at the guy. So once you realise that, then you think, well, screw it. They're going to try and destroy him anyway. So you might as well go in hard and try and rally people.
Yeah.
And try and build something outside of that. So that's where I've got to basically with politics. I'm sort of sticking there, but it does leave me basically homeless.
Yeah, I kind of feel you on that to some extent, but I think there's always an issue sometimes that when things go badly, we always want to go in the polar opposite direction. Or no, when things go badly, even if things just annoy you. I don't know if you ever, if you probably do, like in America, they're like the Koch brothers who fund all these like right wing causes, and they funded stuff here. Yeah. Whenever you read about whatever they're doing, they actually fund a lot of stuff here. Like a lot of the stuff that comes out of Tufton Street is like there's a huge party that kind of wants like the NKVD to kick the door in and go, right, seize all of this, right, you're under arrest. No, you can't take this, it's my property. Right, you heard him confession, he admits to stealing the property of the workers for himself. Right, well, I've been breaking rocks in Siberia by tea time, but that's just a kind of a natural human response. It doesn't actually mean, well, actually, you know what, we should go extreme and we should go the other way. I think sometimes we can get angry and go, I want to go the polar opposite way, when actually that's, yeah, to steal the term, that from Blair, that third way is probably like a better way. And again, I don't necessarily mean Blairism. There was a huge, and very critical of Blairism, the hollowness, the constant, like everything just being for show. But somebody with at least those, like, okay, yes, we're going to work with business. Yes, we want to like make ourselves economically appealing, but we're going to eliminate child poverty. But we're going to have a brilliant well-being health service. But we're going to have all of this like public spending. We're going to have a welfare state. We're going to have,
All I say to that is, what if you can do that in the 90s and the 2000s? You can't do it now, because in the 90s and the 2000s you have sustained economic growth. So you have so the Blair government inherits actually quite a good position. The sort of later years of the Tory, the sort of mid 90s, are actually doing quite well. They don't get any votes out of it, but there's an economic recovery that the Labour Party inherits, and that they sort of like further bed in or whatever. And so you have just like years of growth, like 3-4% growth, and that just means you can basically use the money from that to spend on stuff you want to spend on. But someone's not going to have that. Someone's going to take over an economy with no growth. And he's not going to get growth because he's not going to reverse Brexit. And I get why he's not going to do that. I get the politics of that. He's not going to. It's actually one of the few things I agree with Starmer on, funnily enough, when he took over the Labour Party. I thought, yeah, right, to just accept the Brexit referendum. But
as much as it pains me to say, I think he was too. I think a lot of Remainers like me for a long time argued that, well, we could have a vote on the deal, but I think we were probably wrong. I think yeah.
I was doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think if people vote for something, you have to see it through. It just has to come through. Yeah,
right. You just have to do it. You couldn't fuck about. People voted for it. It doesn't matter that it was close.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter that aspects of how the referendum will run were.
I think that's probably the problem with having referenda.
Yeah, potentially, but once you've done it,
you have to do it. Yeah,
really skewed our politics very badly that we all got kind of sidetracked into that. But so the point I'm making is, again, it's almost just I'm a stuck record really. I don't think you can do that kind of politics anymore, because I don't think the money's there, and so you've got to do something different now. Let's see. I mean, maybe Starmer will surprise me, but it's not. The Blair playbook isn't just something you can take off the shelf and go like, oh, we'll do that, because there's a particular context to New Labour that doesn't exist in 2023.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that to an extent, but it's more like that kind of. It's more that kind of ideology. I think you're probably not going to get out of the. You what?
I get the point you're making.
Yeah.
That you feel like you've just got to try and basically, sit between these.
Yeah, I also think if you're going to do a big societal change structurally, I think almost always it's going to have to be done experimentally and slowly. I think even Margaret Thatcher getting away with doing like so many changes that she did was largely just because they were changes that all the businesses wanted, so it didn't like tank the economy. Whereas I think you can see, even when changes you're doing are right, like even, for example, when the Soviet model collapsed and they switched to capitalism, they did it way too fast in Russia and it caused a massive economic crisis. Even though that's the right thing, the Soviet model was a complete failure. Like, it, actually switching away from it too quickly. Whereas what China did, and not I would praise the Chinese regime, but what they do is they had a very good idea of, okay, well, we started with Maoism, and with the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, we're going to gradually move sector by sector, very, quite quickly in some areas, but like to a much more kind of, at least liberal economic kind of order, right? Whereas, yeah, so I think just generally speaking, if you do major economic change overnight, Liz Truss saw this, you just get chaos. I think any big root and branch change is probably going to have to be a slow, careful process.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to happen, right?
Sure, yeah, I agree.
Because the other side of that is if you don't do it at all, if you constantly, here's the sort of general, I probably need to go in a sec, but here's the course now I finished on, which is that I think people often talk about the risks of being too radical, right? There are also risks of being too cautious.
Yeah.
And you've seen those also in the United States. So the Obama era, for example, was too cautious. And the product of that in the end was that you had millions of voters who just felt disillusioned. They felt like nothing had really changed. They felt they weren't listened to. They felt like they weren't taken seriously. And along came this guy who said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to listen to you and take you seriously and do all the things you want, particularly sort of like angry, backlash against liberal politics. So there's a risk that comes with not being radical enough. And that's what I really see with Starmer that really frightens me, is the idea that if this doesn't work, I don't think the left are going to be coming in and hoovering it up. I think you're going to see the kind of the sort of fusion of, like, if you like, the new right.
Yeah.
Once they've got rid of Sunak and whoever, and they've got someone who's a bit more charismatic and potentially just more radically on the right.
Yeah, you could end up with Braverman in charge, and then God, that's so
yeah, it does. It's not like all the risks aren't just on the radical end.
No, I agree with that. But I think that's kind of my whole argument, that there's like not like a centre ground, but there's like a middle between doing that and between being Keir Starmer and going, well, I'll just do all the policies of the other side, but sensible and without corruption, and going, okay, now I'm going to be super radical. I'm going to do massive change. I think that there's a lot of ground in between that, and I think that probably the best course of action is somewhere in between. It might not be in the centre, maybe two, but it'd be in between those two positions, because one's bad and one's too extreme. Yeah.
100%. That was what I was expecting. I think that's what Joe Biden's done.
I'm a big Biden fan. Biden's done really well, actually. Everyone kind of wrote him off, but then he pulled out of Afghanistan. He did the bipartisan infrastructure bill. He did the stimulus. He did he's actually got like loads done. Yeah,
I think
Biden's been great. I think he hopefully will win the next one. But
I definitely hope he will.
Yeah, well, because it's either going to be Trump or DeSantis. So
the implications for American democracy if Biden loses are pretty bad.
Yeah,
and I he's also like it's a bit frightening that American democracy is dependent on this very frail and slight senile guy. But fuck it, I agree.
Yeah,
he's done all right. So I hope.
Yeah, I mean, people say he's too old and he's going to. But I mean, to be fair, he's always been gaffe prone in the way he speaks. People keep like going, "Oh well, look, he always sounds too old." I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you remember. If you ever seen the clip where he stole Neil Kinnock's speech from the 80s? I've seen the side by side comparison. And he'd obviously just thought, oh, no one's going to watch the British Labour Party conference, without going, well, hold on, all of our newspapers and TV shows have correspondents there who've seen it. And he just changed the names. He changed the Welsh mining town to Scranton, Pennsylvania, and like Kinnock to Biden, and just gave word for word the same speech.
That is amazing. Yeah, I think I have quite a low cringe tolerance threshold.
Yeah, it's very cringe when you see it side by side. You're like, oh, Joe.
Yeah, right. But I mean,
that was the 80s. I'm not blaming him for it now, but still.
that to me is the model that that could work electorally at the moment. Is you have some kind of fusion of a kind of you need the energy of the radical left have a kind of energy.
Yeah.
Right, and you need that campaigning,
that drive and passion.
Like Georgia got the vote out in places that were in big democratic areas, got the vote out. out in the rural areas. But then you need a kind of reassuring, like more middle of the road presence in the leadership, and I just thought that's what Starmer will do. And I think my disappointment that he didn't do that, so often when I encounter people on Twitter, which because I spend too much time on there, they'll say to me, "Oh, you're just a purist. You just wanted everything because you didn't get it. You threw it," and that's just not true. Like I was just really willing to settle.
Yeah. I think that is true though of many supporters though of Corbyn. There are many supporters of Corbyn on Twitter though who that is very much true of.
Yeah, but all political, and I often say this: all political positions have like weirdos.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Only the left that has like
no. The right wing weirdos are really weird. So.
every political position has these weirdos.
Yeah,
and So sure, I agree with you, but I think there's more. There was a moment where I think a really positive fusion was possible. It's probably not possible now. I think my view on it is I need to just stop tweeting about Labour full stop. I need to just let Keir Starmer get on with it, and let's see how he does. He's not my guy. I'm not going to I'll be honest with you. I'm going to struggle to cheer for him in any meaningful way. I'll vote tactically where I am against the Tories, and I obviously want to see the Tories lead because I think they've done real damage. But I'm not particularly. It's not my project.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna, let's see what happens. I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think we all hope we're wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Because we're going to need to get the Tories out, and I hope he's. Yeah. Unfortunately, he seems to be parroting them on everything. It's true. It's like I hope he's lying. I hope he's lying when he says he's going to do their policy on migration because it's just brutal. Like I hope he's lying when that was one of the saddest things actually when he started pandering to them, and I'm like, somebody really has to argue against this just like nonsense hatred of migrants when like the whole crisis has been caused by people not going, okay, well let's just build some centres where they can stay, process the claims, you've got to follow the silence claim, we'll help you find a job, or maybe if so many come we can't take them, we'll work with our partners in Europe to say who can go where. But like they keep trying to just, and it's because they know the Tories know they can't win on economics or anything else. All they can win on is going, everything that's wrong with Britain is because of these small boats, and if we just get rid of them, then you'd be happy, and that's why you're unhappy. But
and they mishandle it. They actually, I think there's an argument to say they're quite happy to let the immigration system run really badly.
Oh yeah. Because then they can keep blaming stuff. Yeah, 100%. Because then they just blame stuff. Yeah.
I just think real people suffer, and.
But instead of blaming the Tories, they're all going, well, the reason I'm poor, the reason I haven't got a job, the reason we've got low wage growth, the reason the public services are strained is because somebody's desperately trying to flee Syria.
Well, it's just it. And you compare it with the numbers of people who settle in other places. And, so we on every level, it's a good example, of where our current political debate just totally lets the public down, and obviously just lets these people down as well, refugees. But again, I'm not expecting that to sort of massively change. But I think, these are examples of where there's almost just not even been a fight, which I find disappointing. There hasn't even been an attempt to try and build something else. It's just been a very quick kind of caving to an alternative position.
Yeah, I think we definitely agree on that. I think that's definitely an area where we at least both agree.
Yeah. Well, it sounds as if on certain things, I'm probably a bit further to the left on the economy. Yeah,
probably. Well, maybe we could debate that another time, but yeah.
It would be a boring world if we all thought the same thing.
Yeah, it would.
Cool. Well, thanks for inviting me.
Okay, great. Well, that's good. Let's end on that note of agreement then.
Yeah, sounds like a good plan.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much for coming on. It was really nice to talk to you. It's a great first debate and stream.
No worries. Good luck with it all.
Okay.
And,
Thank you. You too. Hey, enjoy the rest of your night and weekend.
Bye. Yeah. Thanks to you, man. Cheers.
Nice to see you. Bye. Being English is hard because you do not know how to get off a phone call. You feel too bad. Bye. Thank you. Bye. Sorry. Thank you. Have a lovely night. Have a weekend. Good night. Weekend night. Good night. Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you so much.